They said the canyon was blind. No radar, no GPS, no signal. Every pilot who entered that airspace turned back, except one. When the blackout hit, when the entire sky went silent, her A-10 didn't retreat. It dove straight into the void. You're watching the Scape, where we bring you the untold legends. If you're watching this, it found you for a reason. So, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? The storm that morning wasn't thunder. It was static. Invisible waves rolling over the Corin Plateau until every transmission tower blinked, faltered, and fell silent. In the command tent, screens collapsed into green haze one after another until the room was lit only by the dim pulse of standby monitors. Lieutenant Erin Caulder stood near the back, arms folded, flight suit half-zipped, helmet tucked under her one arm, her eyes fixed on the fading radar sweep that dissolved into snow. No one spoke for a long moment. Then the communications officer's voice cut through the quiet. Blackout Zone confirmed. Everything past Grid 7 is gone. Colonel March leaned forward, tension tightening every word. That's the third hit this week. Enemy jammers must be moving closer. Pull the patrols back until we can see again. Around him, officers exchanged uneasy looks, relieved that someone had given the order they were afraid to speak aloud. Erin said nothing. The words, pull back, carried the same taste every time, iron and defeat. Outside, one by one, A-10s taxied in from aborted routes, engines winding down like exhausted lungs. By noon, the sky above Grid 7 was empty. The Warthog slept and rose, and the silence felt wrong. She walked through that silence into Hangar 2, past tool carts and half-dismantled turbines, until the familiar outline of her own aircraft rose before her. The shark mouth paint was dulled with dust, the metal skin streaked with fuel residue. She climbed the ladder and dropped into the cockpit. The console flickered once, Echo 9, then faded to black. No nav, no feed, no AWACS link, the crew chief called from the tarmac. You go out there, you're flying deaf. Her hands moved across the switches anyway. Deaf is better than blind, she said quietly. He hesitated. You're not cleared for flight. Neither were they cleared to disappear, she answered. At 13:04 hours, the speakers hissed to life. Static. Then a voice, fractured, distant, barely human. Ground team, hit near Ridge 14, taking fire, coordinates. The signal died mid-word. The room froze. Every eye turned to the map. Ridge 14 lay deep inside the Blackout Zone, the last known position of the recon unit Bishop 2. We can't reach them, March muttered, his tone half defeat, half calculation, not without telemetry.
Erin straightened, the decision already forming behind her calm expression. Then I'll go where telemetry doesn't matter. The colonel looked up sharply. Caulder, you won't have navigation or radar support. Then I'll fly by feel. This isn't courage, Lieutenant. It's suicide. No, sir, she said, fastening her gloves. Suicide is hearing them die and doing nothing. Minutes later, the hangar trembled as her A-10's engines roared to life. Ground crews stepped back, shielding their faces from the jet wash, watching the woman everyone had already counted out bring the dead machine back to thunder. The sunlight struck the canopy, painting her visor in gold. She called once into the static. Talon Control, Echo 9 requesting clearance for manual sortie, Vector 17. There was no reply. She smiled faintly. Copy that, taking it as a yes. The throttle slid forward, wheels lifted, and the Warthog climbed into a sky so bright it felt unreal. Behind her, the pilots who had turned back stood at the hangar doors, watching the silver outline vanish into the light. For the first time that day, someone wasn't retreating. As she crossed the invisible line of the Blackout Zone, every instrument on her panel went dark, the world collapsing into the sound of twin engines and her own breathing inside the helmet. Somewhere far below, the signal that had died an hour ago waited to be found, and Erin Caulder was the only one still listening. They thought the sky had gone silent, but silence was where she'd always learned to hear the truth. When Erin crossed into the Blackout Zone, it felt as if the air itself forgot how to breathe. One by one, every instrument on her panel died, until only sunlight filled the cockpit and the steady rhythm of her pulse echoed inside the helmet. The HUD flickered once, then vanished, leaving her alone with the vibration of the engines and the endless hum of static that wasn't coming from the radio, it was coming from the sky. Below her, the Corin Plateau stretched like a cracked mirror, miles of scorched ridges shimmering under a haze of heat. No radar, no GPS, no telemetry. She flew by the sound of the air and the subtle resistance in the controls. Each gust of wind, each shift in pressure, was a whisper she could read. She dropped altitude until she could see the valley floor in full detail, a blur of rocks, sand, and broken steel. The blackout wasn't just interference, it was an architecture of silence. Somewhere down there, the recon team called Bishop 2 had vanished mid-transmission. Their last words were coordinates and gunfire. Erin scanned the terrain, searching for a trace, a shadow that moved differently, a reflection too regular to be natural. Nothing. Only the rhythmic distortion of heat on metal.
Then something changed. The air beneath the Warthog trembled with a low vibration that wasn't mechanical. She'd felt that once before in Afghanistan, electromagnetic interference strong enough to bend compass readings. Whoever was behind this blackout had built a field powerful enough to blind the sky. Her altimeter was dead, but instinct told her she was under 300 feet. It was too low, too dangerous, but that was where truth usually hid. She adjusted the stick gently, her fingers steady, and caught it. A flash of movement, faint but deliberate. It came from a narrow ravine at her 10 o'clock, sunlight glinting off something metallic. She banked hard, circling once. Then she saw it again. A flare, weak and fading, but real. Someone was alive down there. Erin hit the transmit switch out of habit. "Bishop 2, this is Echo 9. I have visual. Hold position." Static answered, a thin hiss swallowed by the blackout. It didn't matter. She angled into a dive, the A-10 responding like it remembered her intentions before she did. Through the haze, she could make out figures, small, pinned near a wrecked convoy, and flashes of gunfire from the ridgeline above them. The enemy had height, cover, and time. She toggled the weapons panel to manual. The targeting computer was gone, but she didn't need it. The geometry of the canyon lived in her muscles. She knew the distance, the drop, the delay. Her thumb pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger roared, the kind of sound that rewrites silence into memory. The first burst walked across the ridge, pulverizing the rocks and sending debris raining over the shooters. She banked left, made a second pass, shorter and sharper. The canyon swallowed the thunder, and when it spatted back, the ridge was quiet. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the hiss of cooling metal. Then a voice broke through the interference, faint and fragile, but human. "Echo 9, we see you. God, we see you." Erin closed her eyes briefly. It wasn't victory. It was proof of life. She leveled out, scanning the ridge for movement, but something in the air changed again. The sunlight shimmered unnaturally, as if the horizon had bent. On her right console, a single light blinked back to life, engine temperature spiking. Hate signature detected. "Man-pad," she muttered. The missile launched from the rocks before the words left her mouth. She caught the white streak of vapor as it raced upward, trailing smoke like a finger pointing at her heart. Flares were offline. Evasion was instinct. She slammed the throttle forward, dropped altitude until the valley walls blurred, and pulled the aircraft into a violent roll. The missile screamed past, detonating mid-air, the shockwave shoving her sideways. She fought the drift, steadied the wings, and climbed back out of the smoke. Her breath came rough but even. "Nice try," she said softly.
The valley ahead widened into a basin of pale dust. Somewhere beyond those ridges, Bishop 2 still waited, and the blackout deepened with every mile she flew. The sun burned white above her canopy, and the A-10, battered, brilliant, alive, cut through the silence like a blade of light. The others turned back when the sky went blind, but in the dark, Erin Caulder finally began to see. The basin unfolded like a scar beneath her wings, vast, colorless, and perfectly silent. At first glance, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful under the afternoon light, but Erin knew the truth. This was the kind of calm that waited for movement, the kind that swallowed noise and memory together. The maps once called it Sector Null, but every pilot who'd flown near it had a different name: the Basin of Ghosts. Her instruments were barely alive, altimeter frozen, horizon line drifting, navigation blinking like a dying heartbeat. The blackout had deepened, wrapping the aircraft in a cocoon of static that whispered through her headset like a living thing. The A-10 trembled beneath her, its hydraulics shivering as electromagnetic waves danced across the fuselage. She steadied the stick and dropped lower, hugging the desert floor until shadows blurred against her wings. A pulse of sound, faint, distorted, cracked through the static. "Do you copy? Do you copy?" The signal was broken, barely a trace of a human voice, but it was enough to make her lean forward, scanning the horizon. "Bishop 2, repeat your last. You're breaking." The reply came like a ghost. "Pinned. East slope. Under fire." She didn't hesitate. The coordinates formed themselves in her mind, an instinct built from years of reading terrain. She pushed the throttle, banking hard until the sunlight caught the A-10's wings like blades. The basin's surface erupted in twin plumes of dust behind her as she accelerated into the valley. The roar of her engines rolled across the sand like thunder from a forgotten war. Through the shimmer of heat, she saw them: two burning trucks, black smoke climbing into the sky, flashes of gunfire dancing from the ridges above. Bishop 2 was pinned between rocks, fighting from cover that wouldn't last. Erin leveled out, switched to manual fire control, and lined up the first run. The targeting display was dead, but her instincts weren't. She knew the pattern, the angles, the distance. Her thumb pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger came alive with a roar that tore through the desert, its rounds carving bright arcs across the ridgeline. The explosions rolled through the basin, scattering sand, steel, and men in the same breath. She banked left, came around again, and released a second burst, shorter, precise, merciless. When the echo finally faded, the only sound left was wind. A voice broke through the static, thin but unmistakably human. "Echo 9, we see you! Thank God we see you!" Erin's shoulders relaxed slightly, but the relief was brief. A warning light flared on her panel, hydraulic pressure dropping. The right wing lagged half a second behind her input. She'd taken damage, probably from debris. "Bishop 2, you're clear to move. Head south to Delta Extraction." The reply was cut short by static, but she could see them starting to run, tiny figures moving through smoke and sunlight. She circled above, keeping her eyes on their trail. Then the earth flashed white. A heat bloom appeared on her infrared feed, not from small arms, but from something far heavier: a launcher. The missile streaked upward, a white spear cutting the sky in half. Erin slammed the stick forward and dove. The explosion hit above and behind her, the shock waves slamming through the fuselage, pitching the aircraft downward. Her breath caught, but her hands stayed steady. She leveled the wings, the A-10 groaning under the strain. the left engine coughing black smoke. "Nice try," she muttered. The ridge was burning now, the launcher gone, but so was most of her hydraulic fluid. The Warthog was bleeding, yet somehow still flying straight. Below, Bishop 2 disappeared into the distance, alive, because she'd made a choice that every other pilot refused to do. Erin climbed slightly, scanning the basin one last time. The static was back, heavier than before, pressing against her headset until her ears rang. It wasn't interference anymore. It was the sound of the blackout itself, a living silence that didn't want to let her go. She pushed the throttle forward and aimed west, toward sunlight and static, determined to bring the storm out of the ghost's hands. They said nothing survived inside the blackout zone, but now something was fighting its way out. At the base, the horizon was empty. The blackout had swallowed everything: signal, radar, sound, and even hope. Inside the operations tent, the monitors glowed weakly before dying one by one, leaving only the buzz of static and the sound of breathing. Colonel March stood over the main table, his hand gripping the edge as if that could keep control from slipping away. "No contact from Echo 9. 50 minutes, a tech said quietly. Someone else whispered, "She's gone." No one argued. Outside, the airfield shimmered beneath a bright, merciless sun. Crews lingered beside grounded aircraft, helmets hanging from their hands, eyes fixed on the same distant line of sky that refused to give anything back. It was too bright, too calm, a silence that mocked them. Every pilot had turned back from the blackout. Every pilot except one.
Deep inside that silence, Erin Caulder was still flying. The A-10 rattled beneath her, the stick stiff in her hands. The hydraulic pressure gauge was redlined, and the left engine temperature had climbed past warning. She could feel every vibration through the seat, the way the machine fought to stay alive. The radio was a wash of static, a storm of sound without words, but she could sense the direction home, not through instruments, but through instinct. The basin was a fading scar behind her, a line of smoke vanishing into heat. Bishop 2 was safe, or close enough to it. That was all that mattered. She adjusted the trim manually, the controls grinding under her touch. The aircraft had become more than metal now. It was a wounded creature running on willpower. Then something flickered across her visor. For a moment, she thought it was light catching glass, but then it pulsed again, faint, rhythmic, deliberate. The HUD, dead for almost an hour, blinked with a single message: signal, acquire, attempt. Erin frowned. "Impossible," she murmured. Another pulse came, stronger this time, and then a voice broke through the static like a ghost finding form. "Echo 9, copy. Do you read?" "Talon Control, this is Echo 9. I read you weak but clear." The reply came sharp and stunned. "Echo 9, confirm. You dropped off radar 56 minutes ago. How are you transmitting?" She smiled despite the exhaustion. "Guess the blackout doesn't like me either." "You're running on fumes, Lieutenant." "Then I'll glide." The silence that followed carried more respect than any metal ever could. She pushed the throttle gently, coaxing the wounded Warthog upward, chasing the faint shimmer of the plateau's edge. The airframe groaned, a deep metallic ache that sounded like memory. For a moment she imagined the hangar crews waiting on the runway, watching a horizon they believed empty. She imagined the line between life and legend, and decided to cross it. A spark flashed across her HUD.
The static vanished. Then the radar tone returned, soft, steady, alive. Echo 9. Active. Miles away, the command tent erupted. "We have her," someone shouted. Colonel March leaned forward, jaw tight, eyes burning. "Get medevac prepped. She won't have fuel for a second pass." On the runway, the ground crews lifted their heads to the sound of engines. It was faint at first, just a low hum, then a roar that grew into thunder. The shape appeared out of the light, an A-10 flying uneven, trailing heat and dust, wings trembling, but still holding. The Warthog was coming home.
Inside the cockpit, Erin lowered the landing gear manually. One indicator failed, the other blinked red. She didn't have time for a second try. The runway shimmered ahead, sunlight bleeding across the asphalt. "Talon control," she said quietly. "Clear the strip." "Copy that, Echo 9. You're clear for emergency landing." She smiled, the exhaustion fading for a heartbeat. That's one way to end radio silence. They had erased her from the radar an hour ago. But legends don't stay gone. They return with the sound of their own engines. The runway shimmered in the heat, a river of light stretching toward the horizon. Fire crews lined the edge, eyes locked in the empty sky. No one spoke. The air carried only the low hum of generators and the whisper of metal across wind. Then, far in the distance, a sound began. Low, uneven, growing. It was the kind of sound that made hearts stop and heads lift at once. The sound of something that wasn't supposed to be alive anymore. "Contact visual," someone shouted. Across the plateau, the A-10 broke through the glare like a ghost returning to its body. The aircraft flew low, one engine coughing smoke, wings trembling, landing gear half-locked. Sunlight bounced off the fuselage, flashing over the shark-mouthed nose art like a grin carved from exhaustion. Every rule of flight said she shouldn't still be in the air, but Erin Caulder had never followed rules. She followed the mission. Inside the cockpit, heat blurred her vision. Sweat stung her eyes, and her hands ached from the tension in the stick. The hydraulic hiss from the right wing sounded like a heartbeat out of sync. The alarm for fuel had gone silent only because the system that powered it had burned out. She whispered a single word under her breath. "Hold." The tower's voice cracked through the radio. "Echo 9, your right gear is not locked. You'll have one chance." "Understood." She adjusted the throttle, balancing thrust against gravity, counting distance in breaths. The runway expanded in the canopy glass, each line painted by sunlight and years of memory. At 70 feet, the left engine sputtered. She trimmed manually, one final act of faith in metal. The A-10 touched down harder than any aircraft should. Tires screamed, the right gear collapsed on contact, sparks bursting along the fuselage as the Warthog tilted, sliding down the runway in a trail of smoke and dust. Erin fought the drift, hands steady, eyes fixed forward. The world became vibration, metal on asphalt, friction on instinct. When the motion finally stopped, there was nothing but the hiss of cooling steel. Silence. Then movement. Fire crews ran forward, medics close behind. The canopy released with a sharp hiss. Sunlight poured inside. Erin unclipped her harness, opened the latch, and climbed out slowly, helmet in hand. Her flight suit was streaked with soot, her hair damp, her face pale beneath the heat, but her eyes were steady. She stood at the top of the ladder for a moment, scanning the airfield. Mechanics froze where they stood, not sure whether to cheer or just breathe. One of them whispered, "She shouldn't have made it." Another answered softly, "She did." Colonel March arrived seconds later, stepping out from a jeep, his uniform streaked with dust. For a moment, he said nothing. He only looked at her, at the wreck behind her,
at the scorch marks trailing across the tarmac like proof of something impossible. Then, quietly, "You brought them out." Erin nodded, "And the storm followed me home." He almost smiled. "You're grounded until further notice." "Of course," she said, eyes shifting toward the aircraft. "You'll have to catch her first." A few of the crews laughed under their breath, relief turning into admiration. The medics approached, but Erin waved them off. She stepped down onto the runway, boots hitting the ground like punctuation marks to a sentence the world had already begun to repeat. The news spread before the engines even cooled. By nightfall, the footage from a nearby drone, her A-10 emerging from heat distortion, wings scarred, engines bleeding fire, circulated through every unit on the plateau. The caption under the clip read, "The one who flew where signals die." In the hangar, someone hung a new patch on the wall, stitched in gray thread and sunlight yellow trim. It read simply, "Blackout Angel." They said the sky had forgotten her name, but after that landing, even the silence remembered. The debriefing room was small, too bright, deliberately bare. No applause, no cameras, just Erin and Colonel March, a single tablet between them, filled with incomplete telemetry, broken graphs, and one impossible flight path drawn by hand. The silence wasn't punishment. It was the kind reserved for things that defied explanation. You flew blind into a blackout. No radar, no targeting. Ignored direct orders, risked a critical airframe. Erin's reply was steady. Bishop 2 walked out. March looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled. "Yes, they did. And your manual override took down one of their jammers. That's why we got the signal back." His tone softened, the edge of reprimand fading into quiet respect. "There'll be people upstairs who won't like that it worked." "I didn't do it for them, sir." "I know. That's why it matters." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single printed still from a drone's corrupted feed, the A-10 emerging through distortion, one engine trailing smoke, wings steady. Below it, a typed line read, "Unauthorized sortie, 0 friendly KIA." Someone had circled the last words in pen. Officially, it'll go down as an anomaly. Unofficially, they're already talking about it in the hangars. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a patch. Gray background, yellow trim, the outline of an A-10 over a faint ring of static. One word stitched beneath it. Blackout.
I heard they've started calling you something else. Blackout Angel. Erin shook her head. I was just the one who didn't turn back. Exactly, March said quietly. Later, as dusk bled across the airfield, the damaged A-10 sat cordoned off beneath the fading light. Mechanics moved around it with a reverence usually reserved for monuments, fingers tracing burn marks along the fuselage. From the perimeter fence, a few of the Bishop 2 operators stopped on their way to transport. They didn't speak. One raised a hand to the cockpit in a silent salute. Erin watched from a distance. The blackout zone was still visible on the horizon, a faint blur where light bent differently. On maps, it was gray. On reports, it was a risk parameter. But to her, it was a promise. Because as long as places like that existed, someone would have to fly into them. She turned the patch over in her palm, the thread catching the last reflection of the sun, then pressed it gently onto her sleeve. The blackout had tried to erase her. Instead, it gave her a name.